of Great Britain. And we know it's been announced that one of the key topics of this anti-corruption summit is the Panama Papers. We also know that President Poroshenko's name was figuring in the leaks. So my question would be, instead of new promises made by the President Poroshenko and Ukrainian leadership, what specific steps could Ukrainian leadership and personally President Poroshenko take to show that he's really serious about tackling corruption?
Well, let me just put the anti-corruption global summit into context, if I may, just for a moment. The summit was announced by the Prime Minister last year when he made a trip to Singapore, long before we had any idea about Panama Papers or anything like that. And I think it comes from our Prime Minister's very strongly held view that we need to tackle corruption on a global basis. And I think his objectives are three or fourfold. One is to eradicate corruption around the world, to expose it and to punish those who are engaged in corruption. The second is to prosecute those who are guilty of corruption. And the third is to prevent corruption, so that it's not just enough to expose it and hold those accountable who commit acts which are corrupt, but also to prevent it happening again. And that requires a global approach, because in the 21st century, if somebody makes illegal profits somewhere, they quite often launder them or invest them somewhere else. It's a global problem. And we've been very clear that we need a global approach, which is why the summit is happening on the 12th of May this week. Now, there will be 41 nations who are attending the summit, 6 international organizations, and representatives from civil society and business. Now that's really important, because this is not just about a government approach. We need government and civil society to work with us. I'm very pleased that Ukraine will be attending the summit. I think that's really important. The invitations went out to G20 nations and those countries who have a story to tell on corruption or are showing a commitment to tackling corruption. Now, I think this is a really important opportunity for Ukraine. Unfortunately, for far too many people, Ukraine is synonymous with the word corruption, and I think that is a huge issue for the country. It prevents inward investment, it strangles development, it strangles prosperity, and we want to see a secure, prosperous and safe Ukraine founded on European values. Now, what we will see coming out of this summit, I don't want to preempt a couple of days beforehand, but there will be a summit declaration and there will be a summit communique, and as part of that, each country present will produce their own action plan, outlining the steps that they will take further to tackle corruption. I think for Ukraine, we have to be clear that there has been progress already under this government. I think if you look at what has been done with the police force, procurement with Prozoro, for example, some of the legislation that's already been passed on public administration reform, these are all good steps in the right direction. But there are some very clear things that, from when I speak to Ukrainians, they are very clear that need to happen. And I think we, the international community, are also clear that they need to happen. At the top of that list has to be reform of the General Prosecutor's Office and the judiciary. I think electoral reform and party political financing. I am very struck by how low the level of confidence is in the RADA, and that, as your country's democratic institution, really should be higher in people's estimation. So I think there are a lot of things that really need to be tackled by the current government, and it's a new government, and we will be looking to see progress happen very, very quickly. And this summit is a real opportunity, I think, for Ukraine to say, this is what we have done so far, because things have been done, but actually this is what we're going to do over the coming weeks and months.
Weeks and months.
Some of it will take longer than that, but I think there is also, from what I see, a real desire, both amongst the international community and domestically in Ukraine, to see swift progress. People need to believe and see that corruption is being tackled.
You were stressing in our previous interview, in the first interview, and it's a known formula that corruption should be tackled from top down. Given the president's influence and actual power over the General Prosecutor's Office, why do you think it is so hard to do in Ukraine?
Clearly that's something you will have to ask the president.
Sure, we will.
But I think the General Prosecutor's office has become so symbolic of the fight against corruption in this country. And it's not just about one man and one individual. Yes, it's absolutely right that we are now looking at a new general prosecutor. That new person needs to be appointed quickly and needs to have the confidence of the electorate, of Ukrainians and the international community, I would add. But it's not just about appointing one figure. The whole of the General Prosecutor's Office needs to be reformed. People need to have confidence in the judiciary in Ukraine. When I'm in the UK, I am very confident that if I do something wrong, I will be punished and possibly go to prison for it. I'm also very confident that if I don't do anything wrong, I have nothing to worry about. And I think Ukrainians need to have that same sense of trust in their institutions, and in particular the judiciary. And if we want to see inward investment into Ukraine, and I would love to see more British companies coming into Ukraine, they need to have confidence that the judiciary works, is fair, and is equally accessible to everybody, and that there aren't special privileges for the certain few who happen to be in positions of responsibility or proximity to those in power.
Well, Madam Ambassador, she was obviously very diplomatic, trying to kind of, in my impression, avoid question about criticizing President Poroshenko of not attending this.
She spoke in very general terms about the fight against corruption. She was very clear that no individuals were going to be named.
Well, because the Ukrainian president got partially in hot waters of deciding not suddenly attending the
London Anti-Corruption Summit,
and to stay in the parliament to vote for his pal without a proper education as a new general prosecutor. Although I saw a lot of different kind of reactions by people saying, "Well, we have to wait and to see what his next step is going to be."
But many people are less pessimistic. For example, this guy Kuzio, he's a scholar at the Canadian Institute for Ukrainian Studies. He wrote an interesting article basically arguing that in appointing Lutsenko, among other things, he was repeating the mistakes of Yushchenko, the former Ukrainian president, who many people say kind of botched the opportunity that was given to him to reform the country after the Orange Revolution. I got to talk to Kuzio today. We had an interesting conversation about the effect of Lutsenko and where Ukrainian politics might be going in the future. So take a look. You wrote this interesting piece earlier in the week, sort of comparing the perceived failures of Poroshenko's administration to Yushchenko's time in Ukraine. And my first question is sort of focused on what we saw this past week with the appointment of Yuri Lutsenko to the post of Prosecutor General. I mean, in what way does that make him similar to Yushchenko as a leader? Now
with Yuri Lutsenko, the equivalent would be Roman Zvaric, who was this American Ukrainian who came in for about 8 months as Minister of Justice in 2005. Both Lutsenko and Zvaric have zero legal training. The only difference at the moment is that we know that Zvaric lied about his academic qualifications. He did not have an MA and PhD from Columbia University. So we'll see if that is also true of Yuri Lutsenko, and if he also is a professor in the same way as Viktor Yanukovych and Roman Zvaric. So there are many similarities, but I think we should be careful in describing these as mistakes. These are not mistakes. I mean, kids make mistakes on a regular basis, but mature adults don't make repeated mistakes. They make conscious decisions, which is very different.
So in that case, if it's a conscious decision, what's the logic behind it? Why are they appointing these people who some might describe as cronies?
They're appointing them because they don't have an interest in fully Europeanizing Ukraine. They don't have an interest in the fields of fighting high-level corruption, of justice, and of improving or implementing the rule of law. These are three key areas, and hence why you have extreme tension always and political instability in Ukraine, because you have, I would say, forces, whether it's political parties, civil society, or journalists, who are genuinely committed to Europeanizing Ukraine in all respects. And then you have the president, now the fifth president, who is in control of state institutions like the security services and the prosecutor's office, who are blocking the implementation of reforms in those key areas of rule of law and fighting corruption and justice. You know, President Poroshenko and co. don't have a problem maybe in some of the economic and financial reforms that the West is demanding, but in those areas they do. And the reason is that they're a product of that system. I mean, you know, Poroshenko's been in every single political party that probably has existed in Ukraine. He's a flip-flopper. He's a product of the Kuchma era, of the way business was done in a non-transparent manner. He's afraid of opening up the Pandora's box of criminal investigations because he doesn't know what that might reveal about himself, even though he's by no means one of the worst oligarchs in Ukraine. I mean, he's one of the best. And because of that, there's a fear. It's also a kind of a cronyism that everybody kind of is in the same group together. They all kind of back each other. There's probably maybe an unpleasant argument one could make as to why this is happening, is that it's financially lucrative to the president. I mean, his assets are the only ones of any Ukrainian oligarchs who have increased in the last 3 years. Now, that's either a product of Ukrainians eating a lot more chocolate during wartime, which I doubt. You know, it would be a very strange national habit, or it's because he's received certain benefits, shall we say, from not pursuing criminal convictions against people. And we're not, you know, when we compare Yushchenko and Poroshenko, what we should understand, this is actually worse now than under Yushchenko, because under Yushchenko, he didn't come to power after the murder of protesters on the Maidan. The Orange Revolution was a peaceful protest. So we've had 100 people murdered on the Maidan. We have a war with Russia where Ukrainian patriots fought off Putin's plans.
So somebody who at least reportedly values his connections with the West and to an extent values his appearance in the West. So to what extent is all this pressure against Shokin and, you know, at least vague threats that the IMF is going to pull the bailout program, is that having any effect on, you know, in decision-making at Bankova, or not really anything at all?
I don't think it's having a tremendous effect because the West is not really heavily pressurizing, you know. I mean, recently in the last month or so, there's been growing pressure from experts, from journalists and some policymakers that there should be more strident conditionality applied to Western assistance to Ukraine, i.e., if you keep on sabotaging these crucial areas of fighting corruption, rule of law, and justice, then there should be no financial aid. So that would be a tougher conditionality. At the moment, there isn't really that much tougher, I would say, tough conditionality. You know, when Western policymakers talk about it, doesn't mean to say they apply it. Plus, I think the Ukrainian authorities, whatever political party they belong to, and this even included Yanukovych, they have a very exaggerated view of their geopolitical importance to the West. And therefore, they think that the West will huff and puff about these conditions, but in the end, they will always cough up because they have to support Ukraine in the face of the Russian threat.
So, you know, another thing that maybe goes along with the parallel with Yushchenko is that after Yushchenko left, we saw a pro-Russian revanche with the arrival of Yanukovych. I mean, do you see a similar possibility on the horizon after Poroshenko leaves?
No, I think you're right to say that Yushchenko, in effect, brought to power a counter-revolution, and in 2010, how completely irrational we can be, he supported Yanukovych over Tymoshenko. But here I don't think we have a potential counter-revolution from pro-Russian forces because, thankfully, from Putin's side, he has fundamentally changed Ukraine's national identity. And this is not unusual for Ukraine. I mean, historically, every country that's been involved in conflict or wars goes through a very rapid change of their national identity. And this is the case in Ukraine. Today, pro-Russian feelings in Ukraine are extremely low. We're talking in the 3/4 of Ukrainians have negative opinions of the State Duma, of the Russian government, and of President Putin. So I don't think it's that. I think where another potential protest down the road will come from, because there is this blockage between pro-European and I would call them Kuchma-like forces, is more from more radical reformist sections, because they are going to be more in tune with, I would say, public opinion, civil society, and journalists who have matured enough since the Orange Revolution when they all just went home. Now they didn't go home, they're pushing for Ukraine's Europeanization. And I think those political forces are represented by Samopomych, led by the mayor of Lviv, Andrei Sadovey, by Batkivshina, led by Yulia Tymoshenko, and by the new embryo political force led by former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili, and maybe some smaller parties like Democratic Alliance. I think those currently are the parties that will be likely to benefit from what we see as stagnation. It's a kind of a circular process. You know, you have a revolution in Ukraine, then you have disillusionment, then you have stagnation, then you have a counter-revolution or another revolution.
Победа – заслуга русского народа. А для армян еще праздник.
Все праздник, да. У всех и всех.
Для создания армии, собственной армии. Для независимости Нагорного Карабаха. Вот это три праздника для нас. Мы рады. Вот видите, все народ, четырехдневные, это очень кровавая война была. Азербайджанцы очень много подготовлены, нарушили договоренности 1994 года. И договоренность была о прекращении огня. Но они напали на нашу. Наши передалеко. Мы получили отпор. Еще отпор дадим.
А когда последний был артобстрел?
Последний артобстрел был 28 апреля.
А вообще вот за время после войны, 94 год закончилась война, вот этот промежуток до апреля, были до этого обстрелы?
Обстрелы были только в боевых позициях, но на мирных жителях, на населенных пунктах уже начали обстрелять ночь 2 апреля.
Это первый раз после 94 года в населенном
Первый
пункте?
раз, да, люди все спят, ночью около 2 или 3 часа начал артобстрел.
Сразу поняла я это, что эта война начинается, снова начинается война. Но так быстро был, что не могли ничего делать. Ничего делать не могли. Дети были в постели, сразу взяли дитя, положили в машину, а оттуда вышли. Даже не знали, что мы уже остаемся, село остаемся и выйдем оттуда. Не знали это.
Այո, մեր տան կողք 3 հատ գրադ է ընկել։ Եվ մեր տունը, ոնց ասես, փլվել է։
So it was Hromadske's report from Nagorno-Karabakh, a region that is sandwiched between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but it's not your regular local conflict, although it's, it's obviously forgotten conflict for most of the part of the world.
But
because
all these different foreign powers are pouring resources into it. They're mercenaries, but the Russians also fund one side, the Turks from the other side.
People usually don't know that even Ukraine is traditionally very involved in this region, but despite that, Ukraine is Orthodox country. It fights often with mercenaries, private mercenaries, or even before it sent a lot of heavy ammunition to Azerbaijan on the Muslim side.
Which is interesting because, that's allying themselves essentially with the Turks against the Armenians, even though Ukraine and Armenia usually are fine in terms of direct relations.
It's true. It's very complicated conflict that is characterized by involvement of a lot of countries. That's why it's so important to follow it, and we will watch it closely. We will be back in a second. Stay with us.
So Crimean Tatars have had a big week this week with their singer Jamala winning Eurovision, but the victory was largely symbolic, especially as Russian authorities continue their campaign of oppression on the occupied peninsula. They banned the Mejlis a couple weeks ago, which is the Crimean Tatars, the ethnicity's self-organizing body, and they've kept up this campaign of arresting top officials in the region, of conducting random searches, all this sort of oppressive behavior in order to keep the population down.
Well, what is happening right now in Crimea is obviously jaw-dropping because on the level of human rights organizations, on the account of human rights organizations. What is happening with human rights violations is unbelievable. Then again, it is happening in the middle of Europe. And Hromadske actually traveled to Crimea last week, and we spoke to a deputy of Mejlis, Ban Mejlis, just hours before he was detained by Russian authorities and annexed Crimea. And take a look at this interview.
Я думаю, что здесь самое главное желание, чтобы население подвластной им территории было лояльно к власти. Это самое главное. Крымско-татарский народ, я смело об этом могу сказать, не признает юрисдикцию России в Крыму и не признает нынешнюю власть в Крыму. Но нынешнюю власть бы устроила не обязательно лояльность такая активная, но и молчаливое такое присутствие крымских татар в Крыму его тоже устроило. Поэтому они взялись организовать такую акцию, которую мы называем акция устрашения. Вот все, что происходит в последнее время, запреты привычных нам мероприятий, там 18 мая запрещают, День флага запрещают, День защиты прав человека запрещают, лидеров не пустили в Крым. Теоретически признав Мejlis экстремистской организацией, власть подготовила для себя почву схватить в любой момент любого крымского татарина. И все может быть. Могут быть и аресты, могут быть провокации. Происходят вот такие вещи, как последние 2 дня.
Actually, it's a very small preview of a lot of material that we have coming from Crimea next week. And actually, the next Sunday show is going to be completely devoted to the topic of Crimea, what is happening there regarding human rights violations, specifically inside Crimea Tatar community, and also what is happening inside Crimea that is, again, is largely forgotten by foreign media at the moment. But with the win of Jamala and who she is from Crimea, this topic is suddenly in the spotlight. So next week, the special show of the Sunday show about Crimea. Don't forget to watch it, and we will be right back in a second. Well, last week was another very important event that happened. It's annual ranking of gay rights in the in the whole Europe. But what was interesting in this ranking by ILGA Europe is disturbing tendencies that they point out in Central Europe. Well, in fact, Eastern Europe still leads as with the places that are the worst places for gay communities in the whole Europe. I think we had a map
that we can show that ILGA had that we can put up on screen. Ranking, the countries by how bad they are in terms of treating gay rights. So you can see the green on the far left in Western Europe, and the red the closer you get to the farther east.
You can see the worst places there, the 6 worst places, among them Russia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. But also what is interesting, if you compare with the last year, all those countries in Central Europe, like Poland and Romania, Bulgaria, they slided slided down in this index with a very disturbing tendencies.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just abstract topics; these are real-life stories. I know you got to talk to a Polish activist earlier today who's been kind of experiencing this stuff on the ground.
Yeah, I talked to Giorgi Tabagari, who is from Warsaw. He's an LGBT activist in Poland. We talked about what is happening in Central Europe in regard of rolling back civil rights equalities, and he tried to explain to us. Let's take a watch. Giorgi, thanks so much for joining us. And I'm going to start with looking at this map of Rainbow Index that ILGA Europe released this week, and it shows a lot of advancement in some countries, even in Ukraine, for example, but there is a very disturbing trend of many Central European countries sliding back and rolling back, actually, a lot of equality measures in the last year. Just wanted to ask you to hear your thoughts as a person who is involved in fighting for equality in Central Europe. What is happening?
First of all, thank you for inviting. The trend and general tendency is obvious. The shift and the change of the government made an influence on a general picture, and I'm here obviously speaking about Poland, because after the elections, this year in October, the last year, sorry, the government has changed, and the rhetoric about minority rights, and that primarily concerns LGBT rights as well, has shifted drastically. So overall situation, and that later on translated into not supporting bills which were already proposed in the parliament, and they continued using the language that is defamatory for the LGBT groups and the minority groups in general. So overall, yes.
Well, this weekend, for example, we've seen record numbers of people showing up for LGBT Pride in Krakow, in Poland, which is a very conservative city. At the same time, you're talking about these attacks from political elites, and it reminds me a bit of general dynamic in Eastern and Central Europe, because as we talk here on Hromadske with other LGBT activists all around the region, they all point out that actually in recent years, many political elites have started using this topic to kind of enable hate, but there is not such a powerful backup from the public when it comes to homophobia. So what is it? Is it just political projects and political attempts of political elites to spread homophobia, or is this really the case that homophobia in general is also on the rise?
I wouldn't say that the public is exactly following the rhetoric of the government, because when it comes to certain governments in general in Central and Eastern Europe, they are not exactly in line with the rhetoric towards the LGBT groups. In case of Poland, for instance, currently we have the conservative, ultra-right, the PiS, the government. But when it comes to Pride, for instance, you mentioned Krakow Pride and the record number of people. This is a general tendency. Same is going to happen in Warsaw on the upcoming Pride in June, because the anger towards the government is rising. And recently there were 250,000 people marching in the streets of Warsaw to protest the actions of the PiS government. And actually the continuation of this will be also the Equality March, which is going to happen in June. So it's not exactly in line. We cannot say that they have the general public support on like having homophobic stance, and it will actually translate on the Equality March, which will happen in June.
Well, exactly. It's very fascinating that suddenly the issue of equality, civil rights equality, is not marginalized anymore, and it's such in the link with the political developments in many countries. My last question: I know that I've seen from your Twitter, and you reported in your organization, your Gay Rights Center also has been a site of attack, increasing a number of attacks. And actually, if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that you've never seen such a number of attacks, even against your own center in ever. Is it really the truth? Can you clarify that?
Yes, that's true. Campaign against homophobia within the last 15 years, there hasn't been any single attack. Not to mention that frequent attacks like that happen ever since the new year. It's been three times already, when during the daylight, when it's in the afternoon, when they expect that there are a lot of people and the cameras can record them, they were ready to break in the office. And it happened 3 times already. They broke the windows, they tried to break in the office. Obviously, we cannot have any empirical proof that this was somehow linked to the government changes, but generally the tendency is there. The past years, nothing like this happened to our organization, and now there is already 3 times. And also, the campaign against homophobia is not the only organization. Also, Lambda, another organization based in Warsaw, has been also attacked recently. So it's a general trend that the people probably feel that because of the PiS government now, conservative party can easily attack to marginalized groups, and it won't be investigated. The police will simply probably close the case, and it won't be really followed up. So when there is no feeling of justice and fairness, then the people can actually do things like this to the organizations like us.
Giorgi, thank you so much for sharing your story, and stay safe and good luck.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Well, a bit earlier, I talked to another journalist from Russia. This time it's Anna Nemtsova, and Russia, unfortunately, has seen a spike in another anti-gay violence in Moscow. There was another murder, this time of a gay journalist, and Anna reported this event, so I talked to her to find out more details, what happened there, and what is happening with the investigation. Take a look. Anna, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's just start by pointing out that obviously Russia hasn't been the most welcoming place for LGBT community, and by accounts of many ratings, it is one of the worst places for gay people on the continent. At the same time, we see this very disturbing news coming of another murder of a gay journalist. It's not the first one, although there is a lot of confusion when it comes to this particular case because authorities are reluctant to call it a hate crime attack. Some colleagues of Sasha, they're also reluctant to call it hate crime attack. On the other hand, some activists called it out as a hate crime attack. Can you clarify and help us to explain this case particularly?
Well, you know, when I was reporting the story, I did not focus on the concrete background that journalist had. I was really interested in the reaction that we had in Russia's journalist community to that murder. In fact, when the public shows no reaction to a journalist's murder, there were maybe around 17 journalists killed since 2012 in Russia. And some people say Russia got used to journalists being killed. That is very upsetting. But when you see journalists not reacting to somebody from our, profession being killed, that is even a bigger drama. And that was not the first journalist killed this spring. Unfortunately, in April, we had one more reporter, a very famous, well-known writer in St. Petersburg, stabbed to death in very similar circumstances. He was killed in his own apartment, stabbed at his back many times. Alexander Rubtsov, who was killed this month, was also stabbed to death in his apartment. In the first case, we know that the writer was gay. In the case with Alexander Rubtsov, I'm not sure his colleagues deny that.
To wrap things up a bit, I want to ask you and clarify this issue. As I understand, Russia, as Ukraine, as many post-Soviet countries, still doesn't have hate crime law. So even if those attacks were hate crime related and not professional related, still there is no possibility to investigate them properly. Isn't it the case?
That's true. And the violence comes as the very last stage. And as the first that I was trying to say in case of our list of reporters being published in Ukraine, when the community do not understand that something is going really wrong and there is an attack on journalists, that is the first, bad news. And it can take you as far as seeing journalists being murdered, and that's what we see in Russia. And we don't see it in Kyiv yet, but we see lawyers being killed in Kyiv. Unfortunately, in Russia, there is no reaction. There is no proper investigation because we're not pushing hard enough. Journalists do not get together and decide that this is the time when we are going to investigate what happened to that particular reporter.
first drew attention to the situation. There he is right there, staring, peeking at us. But he's associated with it, and he sort of defended the whole thing.
He shared the same leak, and he justified that, and it went even further because his boss, Interior Ministry, also supported it.
I mean, it says a lot that these people hacked the DNR database, and the first thing they did was share journalist information. My own Kyiv Post, a reporter there, wrote a pretty fiery op-ed about the matter, saying that today Gerashchenko is endorsing the scolding of journalists who applied for separatist accreditation as the only protection they could get to perform their job. The accreditation didn't guarantee them safety, but it was better than nothing. The publication of the list sends a troubling signal about Ukraine and freedom of speech. So, I mean, and that's really been the reaction across the board from the West. And I, in particular, got to sit down with Muzaffar Suleymanov. He's a researcher at the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York. We Skyped today, and he came out with some pretty strong words against the leak and the subsequent harassment. So yeah, we're interested in talking and getting your opinion on the recent leak of journalists' personal data. So first of all, I mean, I just wanted to hear your perspective on it. I mean, what does this say about Ukraine's commitment to press freedom?
As we said in our statement, CPJ was disturbed by the release of information of the contact details for more than 4,000 journalists who traveled to eastern Ukraine to report on the developments there, including the tragedy involving that airplane which was shut down in 2014. And not only that, but also by the fact that both the hackers and the government officials from the Ukrainian parliament and the Interior Ministry, the Interior Minister himself, Arsen Avakov, basically equating reporting on from behind, from across the front line, with aiding the terrorists. And this is a huge problem. They are equating journalism to terrorism.
Right. So, I mean, I guess I'm curious, I've heard some pushback saying that, yeah, the equating it to terrorism is terrible, but that putting the contact deals themselves out isn't that bad because journalists put out their contact deals all the time to develop sources. I mean, so do you have a response to that? I mean, is it maybe that aspect of it not as bad, or is...
Yes, when a journalist gives his or her contact, they're doing it on their own will, and they're giving it to the specific person. When somebody hacks a database and publishes their contact, this is a completely different thing. Like, imagine right now somebody hacks a database of, say, Interior Ministry and publishes all the contact details for all the police operatives. Right. Is it a crime? Yes, it is a crime. The same applies to journalists. Journalists do give their contact information to their sources. They give contact. They publish under. Sometimes they choose to publish under their own names, but sometimes they try to use a pseudonym. And sometimes they don't want to publish the information. And here is where you have the law on privacy, on the protection of on privacy. If you don't want to publish your information, and if somebody does it for you, this is a crime. This is a violation on the law on protection of private life. And this was highlighted in the letter that the Secretary General of the Council of Europe just sent last week to the President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, in which he said the publishing of this information is a violation of European Convention on Human Rights. It is a violation of European laws on protection of privacy. And if Ukraine wants to become a part of Europe, they have to respect European laws.
So that was Muzaffar Suleymanov, researcher at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Some interesting things to say, some pretty harsh words.
Well, everybody's pissed off, and we saw a lot of statements supporting journalists and condemning Ukrainian authorities, but also demanding an investigation in the matter. Well, obviously, if you report from Europe this week, it's very hard to ignore this elephant in the room, which is Eurovision. And despite anyone who will tell you that it's not political, this year it was extremely political.
Right. And I mean, how could it be anything but political if you're going to base it off of nationality, the votes? But in any case, we'll show you a video soon. My name's Josh Kavensky. I'm a reporter at the Kyiv Post. I want to remind you can see all of our content online on YouTube. You can also keep in touch with what's going on in Ukraine at the Kyiv Post websites, www.kyivpost.com, and the Hromadski's website as well.
Well, my name is Maxim Aristavi, so stick around for Jamala for her performance at Hromadske with her Eurovision winning song. But join us next week. Until then, keep up with our social media and website. Have a great week.
Strangers are coming, they come to your house, they kill you all and say we're not guilty, not guilty. Where's your mind? Humanity cries. You think you are God, but everyone dies. Don't swallow my soul, our souls.
Hromadske презентує офшори назавжди.
Єдина причина для цього – це прозоре відокремлення бізнесу українського президента від будь-якого політичного впливу.
Як поживають заокеанські компанії президента і як Порошенко залагоджує скандал.
На такой платеж требуется лицензия. Совершить его без лицензии невозможно.
Бізнес-проект під прикриттям соціальної програми. Платіжні термінали для інвалідів не мають з ними нічого